there is this tension between Western influence, namely in the form of France and the United States. France has this currency control over the region, so there's very little financial autonomy for these states. You have ECOWAS, which I've heard described as sort of a African NATO kind of proxy organization, with the same way that NATO has the Western alliances, and people think it's basically just puppeted by the United States, although there is ostensible autonomy. And so that on one side you have the Nigeria as the strong Western ally in the region, and ECOWAS threatening to send troops in and oust the coup, Western support for the ostensibly elected government that was just overthrown, but also in the background, a feeling as though the elected government, the overthrown government, wasn't necessarily democratically elected in the first place. And I also saw some polls from this Economist article from about a week ago that were suggesting that majorities in Niger actually supported the political agenda of the coup government. Does that sound accurate? Am I summarizing that accurately? Okay. So I'll come back to you, Dr. Sylla, then. As a kind of anti-imperialist American observer, I think it can be difficult to wrestle with the kind of optics of a coup, the optics of something that is kind of sort of plainly undemocratic, insofar as that the coup government is not elected, but on the background of a system where already there's a sentiment that there is not a lot of democracy going on in the first place. So, how should we interpret polls that suggest that there is sympathy for the coup government? How should we interpret the fact that on the date, August 6th, that the ECOWAS countries were given as a deadline for the coup government to leave? You had this massive protest in this Chinese-built stadium, where the public seemed to be demonstrating a desire or support, rather, of the coup government. I mean, how should the left be appropriately assessing what the will, or the at least popular consensus of people in Niger is right now?
Yeah, that is a very important question. And I think to try to answer it, there are two things that must be said. The one is about the history of Francophone Africa, because Francophone Africa is very special. Most of these countries, if you accept Guinea, they did not have proper independence. Many people do not know that. When I say proper independence, most of these countries in the 1960, they signed cooperation agreements with the French government at the time, saying that you'll have your flag, you'll have your anthem, but no sovereignty. The external trade, the diplomacy, your raw materials, your currency will be controlled by France. And this is not something, secret, because these agreements now are available in the public domain. Everyone could see that. And we talked about it in my book on the CFA franc. So that means that except for Guinea, all these countries, they don't have proper independence. But the thing is, during colonial times, after the Second World War until 1960, the colonial administrations have done their best to eliminate any nationalist feeling among the elites. And when I say nationalist, I am not taking that in a pejorative manner, but just to say leaders who love their countries, who wants, to build a prosperity for their people, honest leaders, and they have been killed or marginalized politically. So that means that in Francophone Africa, it is not possible for, genuine leftist civilian, people to have access to power, because these are presidential system, and so that the power is with the president. And so that means that with normal elections, you could not have leftist people in power. And when you look at the history of Francophone Africa, generally speaking, most of the leaders who have been the most progressives, they are the military. That to understand that, you have to know what has been done during the colonial period. All the people who ruled our country from 1960, they did not want independence from France. If you take, for example, Gabon, the leaders said to General de Gaulle at the time, we don't want to become an independent state. We want to be a department of France, and France then take independence. You see, so this has to be said. The other thing is that the concept of democracy is very elusive, and it's a manipulative concept in the sense that after the Cold War, there has been this idea there is a democratic transition in Africa. And what is really ironic about that is that they have been talking about democratic transition to mean that, well, there were no longer any, single party regimes, etc. But at the same time, we are in the context of global neoliberalism, where workers' rights were, diminished, where workers' rights were, suppressed, extra, where the states themselves were obliged, to adjust, to IMF policies, World Bank policies, WTO, World Trade Organization policies, extra, global neoliberalism. And this did not create, the expectation associated with, the rise of multi-party politics. You see, so on the one hand, you have political liberalization, but you also have economic liberalization, which undermined the promise of political liberalization. That's why the populations, they sometimes they sense that there's a blockage because some of these leaders have been elected through very fraudulent, elections, and often the West will just say it has been peaceful. We know that there have been some irregularities, but overall, it's Africa, so it's fine. And so these rulers, they might be so-called democratically elected, but they are not popular and they are not legitimate in the sense that they did not create the economic performance that is, expected by the people. And sometimes they are politically very repressive. And so you could sense that sometimes this coup might seem popular, but this does not mean that people want to be ruled by the military. They just sense that this could be, a window of oxygen to try something else.
I see. So could you dig in a little bit deeper into this idea of the kinds of what the effect of having the economic control over Niger and these other West African countries, this kind of lingering colonial financial relationship between France and these countries? We have, I think, more familiarity with what that looks like, even as we discuss the fight over power in Europe and in Ukraine. But what are the kind of what are the ways in which these countries' hands are being tied? And what is the effect domestically of being forced to go along with these IMF policies and Western neoliberalism?
I will give you one example. When there had been this coup, the ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, they said, we are going to sanction financially Niger. The thing is, there are some type of sanctions that no nation could impose to another sovereign nation. But in the case of the CFA franc, it's possible. Russia has been sanctioned financially. For example, its foreign assets has been seized by by the US, by European governments, etc. They could do that. But these countries could not ask the Russian central government to stop, the monetary operations, the financial operations within Russia. They can't because Russia is a sovereign state and they have their own currency. But in the CFA franc countries, that means countries using the CFA franc in West Africa, 8 of them, including Niger. Well, it is possible for the central bank to stop the operations within this country at the demand of ECOWAS, which is an entity totally different from, the West African Monetary Union, which, gathers the countries using the CFA franc. So when people talk about sanctions, financial sanctions, they never stress that aspect. But this is a colonial sanction because obviously they could not do that to Guinea because Guinea has its own national currency, you see. So that means that the current government in Niger could not have access to its own domestic financial system. You can't do that to Russia or any other sovereign country. This is a colonial system.
And outside of a moment like this coup, have there been political forces within the country that have been pushing to decouple from the CFA franc? Are there, or do those movements get derailed through more traditional political means? I guess what I'm asking is, to what extent is there a domestic conversation, an internal conversation about a desire to get off of this colonial currency? Or is there any sentiment within the country that says, well, we benefit from it in X, Y, and Z way? Is there concern about the, ability, the possible downsides of being out on your own, as it were? I mean, what are those conversations like?
Well, we have this conversation to get rid about the CFA franc since 2015, at least. You see, and there have been immense, progress in terms of, making this issue visible. because since the independence to, let's say, to 2015, it has been a kind of a dirty secret for France and the African elites. But the thing is, there has always been this disconnect between the African elites and the populations. The populations are radical in the good sense of the term, in the sense that they want to delink from neo-colonialism. They want freedom. They want, better living conditions. Even the coup in Niger, you could see this, disconnect between the people and, those who did the putsch. Because I have the feeling that at the beginning, this was an internal affair. But the putschists managed to frame it in a way that sounded, a bit anti-imperialist, etc. And that resonated with the people. That means there was this demand from the people, but simply the leadership was not there. So, I mean, the people want the change, but the system has been made to put in power those who will serve the loyal interests, of France and generally, the global elites.
So, Alex, talk to me a little bit more about the impact of this on U.S. military operations, and specifically the role that the base in Niger is playing with the United States' drone warfare operations.
Sure. Well, I'd like to preface it with just coming out that I'm not a West African expert. Like many people in the U.S. who are interested in global affairs and try to understand what's going on in the world. I'm learning about things, but there is this base with, I think it's like 1,000 U.S. troops. There's an argument over whether it's primarily used for surveillance or to conduct drone warfare. But their partners were the government in Niger. Now their partner's gone. And basically allegedly trying to root out, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, these kind of terrorist affiliated groups, which, magically, you have this trend where when there's instability, they kind of seize on that. So, for example, in Syria, when they had mass protests against Bashar al-Assad, that's when out of nowhere the terrorists came. Turned out that many of them were getting weapons and funding from the United States and its allies and NATO. And just a couple days ago, we had 17 military soldiers in Niger attacked by terrorists. So, there is this, deep, the United States is deeply entrenched in the security situation in West Africa, on the pretense of going after these, jihadist groups, which, we've been doing since 2001 and don't seem to be making a whole lot of progress. So you have to wonder why.
And not only not making progress, right? But the argument is that prior to U.S. involvement in the region, there was not this exponential blossoming of terrorist attacks in Africa.
Yeah.
That what was the statistic that there were 2 terrorist attacks before the year like 2005 or whatever it was, and then afterward it's just the numbers are off the charts. The same way that there was this criticism of U.S. engagement in Libya that even Obama admits was the worst mistake of his presidency and has led to open slave markets and the like, that we actually caused the very problem that we were purporting to go in to solve.
Yeah, and I would just add that in Libya, the European Union is still funding the very same bodies that are carrying out slave programs and human trafficking programs. I had an article on that about in the Gray Zone a few months ago. But what I think the real thing that people should have their eyes on at this moment in terms of the security situation is the potential for, I won't compare it to Ukraine. I think it's a much more apt comparison to Iraq, because what happened with Iraq was region-wide instability. And, I really fear that that's what's at stake here, with, ECOWAS still today saying that they're going to invade if all else fails. Basically, if the coup leaders don't reinstall the deposed president. And so you're going to have, a block of countries that are supported by the West invading, and a block of countries that are supported by China and Russia defending. And, again, in that situation, as I said, in Syria, there's going to be, I'm sure, mass casualty incidents, terrorist attacks, the formation of quasi-states, trying to, rule over as much as they can under the name of, Islamic fundamental, Salafism, and really just a disastrous. There's a potential for a really disastrous region-wide conflict here that's just going to further impoverish the region and multiply many of the problems that it's already experiencing. So, I think that, much like Ukraine, the Western left really needs to be calling for a de-escalation and calling for, not like, fighting back anytime there's any discussion of military support to people that are in this situation planning on invading a country.
Well, one difference that does seem to be pretty notable, if we're dabbling in a kind of Ukraine proxy war analogy here, is that unlike what has happened so far in Ukraine, there is, correct me if I'm wrong, a block of these similarly situated Francophone West African countries who have said, okay, ECOWAS, if you get involved, we are going to stand with the Coup government in Niger, correct?
I did not see that. I saw that, Burkina Faso and Mali and Guinea, who have been kicked out of ECOWAS, said that they would back the military government in Niger. You could be right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
So let me ask you this, Dr. Sylla. What does that mean? I mean, my understanding was that there was this August 6th deadline. They said to reappoint or reinstate President Bassoum, that was their line in the sand. And instead of complying with that, there was this huge protest at this Chinese-built stadium where the people seemed to be expressing a desire to support, at very least, the politics of the coup government. So where do we stand now on this kind of face-off between the ECOWAS Western-aligned countries and these disgruntled Francophone countries that seem to share the sentiments, at very least, of the coup military government in Niger?
Yeah, in fact, the ECOWAS make many diplomatic blunders because the first thing they did is to impose illegal sanctions. And, all of these countries are landlocked countries. And there are some, at least a UN convention saying that, well, you have to be aware of the situation of landlocked countries. You could not impose some kind of trade sanctions, etc. But they did it illegally. So they want to restore constitutional order, but they do not themselves respect the law. The other thing is that what would be the concrete object of restoring constitutional order? I mean, this president is not popular. And let's suppose that they wanted, to restore him to power. But maybe before they defeat the army in Niger, maybe the putschists might kill him. What would happen? And they need this army to create, at least to go towards a new government, to fight, the jihadists and to create a sense of order in the country. So if they defeat this army, what would happen? They would have an army of occupation. And let's suppose that we have a military coup in Nigeria. What would happen? Would all the other countries in West Africa say that we are going to wage war to Nigeria to restore constitutional democracy? No. That means that they have another agenda. And these warmongers, Nigeria, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire, they are not legitimate, domestically speaking. And they want to have a kind of external legitimacy by going to a war that would be backed by the West, especially France. You see. So, I mean, yeah, there is no point to go to war. And as Alex said, this would be devastating. And you see what I mean? Those who rule us, sometimes, they are supposed to be intelligent people, but they are not. Why? Because if you militarize a zone, expect to have military leaders. Look at Egypt. You have military leaders. Look at Libya. Even look at Mauritania. The current president is a military people. He came to power through election, but he is a military people. So if you militarize a zone, expect to have, military leaders, military coup. So using force is never the solution. They have to dialogue and to address the root causes of, this military coup. Because it is really easy to say that, well, these are the bad people. The thing is, why these so-called bad people, they are in power? Because the state is weak. Because the so-called elected government did not create the performance expected by the people. And generally, when the head of states in ECOWAS, they violate their own constitution, ECOWAS is silent. That means that, and ECOWAS is an empty shell because ECOWAS is just, the 15 head of states. And if you accept those who are the military, it's 10 states because Cape Verde is a democratic country and is, aside, of these dynamics. So that means that, I was listening to an interview by the parliament of the ECOWAS. And the head of the parliament of ECOWAS said, until now, it was last week, we have received no information about, this so-called project to go to war. And the parliament of ECOWAS is supposed to represent the people. And all the people, they said, we don't want to war. But you have 10 head of states who say that we have to go to war to destroy Africa.
So it's about a lot of empty threats, basically. And it seems like the coup government understands that.
Yeah.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.